One of the most misunderstood epidemiologic studies is the case control study. If you search through published papers, you'll find tens of thousands of misrepresentations of this study design under various names such as prospective case control study, cross-sectional case control study, interventional case control study, cohort case control study, longitudinal case control study, descriptive case control study, and experimental case control study. None of these designs actually exist. To understand how to calculate sample size for a case control study, it's crucial to first understand what a case control study is. Firstly, let's clarify what a case control study is not. It's not an experimental study because, in an experimental or interventional study, the researcher assigns participants to receive either a treatment or a placebo. A case control study is an observational study, also known as a non-interventional study, because we do not assign participants to any exposure group. We observe them as they are. A case control study is also not a descriptive study. Studies can be classified as either descriptive or analytical. If studies were jobs, descriptive studies would be like photographers who capture events to share on social media, showing who was there, where it happened, and when. Descriptive studies describe events in terms of person, place, and time. In contrast, analytical studies, also known as comparative studies, are like detectives investigating a crime by comparing different pieces of evidence. In a case control study, we compare two groups which are cases and controls, as the name suggests. Additionally, a case control study is not a longitudinal study, where the same individuals are followed repeatedly over time. Data collection in a case control study typically involves sending a one-time questionnaire to gather all the necessary information. Having cleared up the confusion, let's reveal what a case control study really entails and when it's useful. To understand what a case control study is, let's compare it with its twin brother, the cohort study. In fact, the case control study is also called a TROHAC study, which is simply cohort spelled backward. You can think of a case control study as a poor man's version of a cohort study. What does that mean? To understand this better, let's first unpack what a cohort study is. The term cohort originates from the organization of Roman soldiers. A Roman cohort consisted of about 480 soldiers broken into groups, each led by a centurion. These cohorts traveled, fought, and often died together. Similarly, a cohort in a study consists of groups of individuals who start the research journey together and are followed over time. Some develop the outcome of interest, others do not. Like Roman cohorts who were healthy at the beginning of their battles. In a cohort study, all participants are initially healthy, meaning they haven't yet developed the outcome of interest. It's only by following them over time that we track outcomes and compare their incidence between groups based on their exposure status. However, when the outcome is exceedingly rare, detecting it may require a very large number of people or a long follow-up period, or both. This is the challenge with cohort studies. We may not always have the time or resources to follow people over extended periods or include large numbers in our study. So, what do we do then? This is where the case control study comes in. Instead of starting with disease-free individuals and following them over time until outcomes occur, in a case control study, we start with individuals who have already developed the outcome and trace back to see what exposures they had. In a case control study, the outcome of interest is actually the exposure. Let's consider an example. Imagine a small town with a single restaurant where several cases of food poisoning have been reported among patrons. Not everyone who visited the restaurant became sick, and our goal is to identify what specifically caused the illness. Was it a particular food item, ingredient, dessert, or coffee? We don't yet know. What we do know is that some patrons got sick while others did not. This scenario is ideal for a case control study because the outcome, which is food poisoning, has already occurred, and we're investigating what exposure led to this outcome. How do we investigate this? We need to identify cases and controls. We might define cases as individuals who developed food poisoning within a week of visiting the restaurant. Controls might be people who visited the restaurant at the same time but did not develop an illness. For example, if you went to the restaurant with someone who did not get sick, they could be a suitable control. By comparing what cases and controls consumed, we can identify which food items were more likely to be consumed by cases than by controls during the study. Now that we have a basic understanding of what a case-control study entails, let's move on to calculating the sample size using the chi-squares platform. First, we select the comparative study with 2 arms option. As a case-control study has exactly 2 arms, the case arm and the control arm, we choose percentage as outcome since we're interested in comparing the proportions of patrons who consume different items. Next, we enter the prevalence of the outcome among the control group. Remember that in a case-control study, the exposure is the outcome of interest. For instance, if our primary suspect is fried chicken, we want to know what proportion of the control group consumed fried chicken on a given day. Since this specific number is often unknown, we typically use prevalence data from the general population. Then, we specify the smallest difference we want to detect. For example, entering an odds ratio of 1.5 means we're looking for a scenario where people who ate fried chicken are 50% more likely to get food poisoning compared to those who did not eat it. We set a 95% confidence level and then opt for a two-tailed test, which means we do not assume the direction of the association between eating fried chicken and getting food poisoning. Next, we provide a power of 90%. A more powerful study can detect smaller differences. A good power estimate should be between 80 to 90%. Next, we supply the ratio of controls to cases. We recommend putting 4 here. Anything beyond 4 doesn't actually help you any further. The choice of number of controls is very arbitrary in case control studies, and this is the main reason we can never use case control studies to estimate population prevalence, because the denominator changes very arbitrarily with whether I used 1 or 4 or 8 controls per case. Finally, we provide the anticipated response rate, which helps adjust our sample size in the event some people refuse to participate. And just like that, we are done with our sample size calculation. The app tells us that we need 28 cases and 109 controls, or a total sample size of 137 people. We can click on Show Reference to copy the formula and citations to use in our work. Congratulations! You can now calculate sample size for case control studies on the chi-squares platform.